The UN is set to investigate war crimes in Syria. It will gather evidence to put before the courts, but will anyone be charged and will justice be done? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rochelle Carey. There's been no shortage of evidence of crimes carried out in Syria during the 5 years of conflict, both by the government and opposition fighters. And no other conflict have so many atrocities been so widely seen and shared on television and via social media. We've seen the destruction of Aleppo, its residents under siege and facing heavy bombardment for months. Children being denied food and basic medicines. Health workers treating victims of chemical weapons. But despite the world watching, the appalling acts of violence, slaughter, and inhumanity continue with seeming impunity. Now the United Nations General Assembly has voted to act at setting up a special panel to investigate war crimes and human rights abuses. But how successful can it be in holding those responsible to account and bringing them to justice? So here's what the special UN team is tasked to do. Collect, consolidate, preserve, and analyze evidence of war crimes and human rights abuses committed in Syria, while also preparing legal cases to bring to criminal courts or tribunals in the future. The team will build upon work already done by the UN Commission of Inquiry on Syria, which was created in 2011. 15 countries voted against Wednesday's resolution, including Russia, Iran, and China. But 105 supported the plan, which was drafted by Liechtenstein.
The situation in the Syrian Arab Republic is the defining crisis of our time. The armed conflict, which has been underway for 5.5 years now, has been carried out with a blatant and systematic disregard for the most basic rules of international humanitarian law by conflict parties, resulting in the unprecedented displacement of people, causing enormous human suffering and destabilizing the region. We have postponed any meaningful action on accountability too often and for too long. Our inaction sends the signal that committing war crimes and crimes against humanity is a strategy that is condoned and has no consequences. We have missed the best moment to send the contrary message a long time ago. The second best time to do so is today. In adopting the resolution before us, we are finally taking one meaningful step to meet the expectations that we have failed for such a long time.
Syria's ambassador to the UN reacted angrily to the vote.
This agenda is represented in trying to legitimate the external interference and to topple legitimate governments by military force, destroy the resources of peoples, steal their wealth, disjointing and disintegrating these peoples in sectarianly and religiously under the coverage of the UN resolutions.
Let's bring in our guest now in London, Rodney Dixon, an international lawyer with experience in several international criminal courts. In Paris, Ole Solvang, Deputy Director of the Emergencies Division at Human Rights Watch. And also in London, award-winning journalist and Middle East analyst, Sharif Nashashibi. Welcome to all of you all. And I want to start with getting a reaction from each of you to what has happened in the UN with this vote and setting this up. And I guess I want to start with you, Rodney, your reaction.
It's a historic decision, this. It's never been done before to set up an investigative mechanism through the General Assembly. So a very important step in taking forward investigations, preparing actual cases for trial. Of course, the big question is what happens thereafter. Will a court be established and how will that be done? But the critical first step has been taken.
Ole, do you see it the same way?
Absolutely. This has been, a very important step, just as Rodney was saying. It's going to take a long time. The road to justice and accountability will be extremely long. But this is something that Human Rights Watch and more than 200 other civil society organizations have been calling for. As you know, it is usually this UN Security Council that deals with issues of justice, setting up tribunals, referring situations to the International Criminal Court. There, of course, the problem has been that Russia and China have abused their veto to block any efforts to support accountability. So this is an incredibly important step to bypass that and to take a first step towards providing justice for the thousands of victims and to start holding perpetrators accountable for their crimes.
And you brought up some really good points about the veto power of Russia and some of their votes, and we're going to get back to that in just a moment, certainly. But Sharif, first, do you share the same optimism? Maybe optimism maybe is a strong word, but Rodney and Ole both say at least this is a first step. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think it's good news in the sense that because the resolution passed overwhelmingly, this shows that the international community still has the genuine will to bring about accountability in the conflict. It also shows how isolated the regime and its allies are in trying to block this. But my concern is, given that Russia and China have vetoed referral of this conflict to the International Criminal Court, my worry is, are we going to see a day when all this evidence being collected is going to lead to prosecutions? The Commission of Inquiry has been doing its job since 2011, and we are really no closer to accountability, to justice. There is still a heightening sense of impunity in the conflict. So I worry that all this great work, will it lead somewhere eventually?
So let's talk about that, Ole. I'd like you to pick up that point. How do you see this actually being carried out, actually being implemented, or is it just pie in the sky?
The point was being made that it is unclear what court will take up these cases, and that's true. And Russia will likely continue to block any referral to the International Criminal Court. But that's not the only venue where criminal cases could take place. We already know that there are several European countries that are investigating and preparing cases against suspected war criminals in their countries, people who have come as refugees or asylum seekers, for example. And it is incredibly hard for them to find the evidence necessary to really determine whether these are criminals. There's also the possibility of a regional tribunal being set up, perhaps without the legitimacy from the Security Council. We can also not rule out completely, although it seems unlikely today, that the geopolitical situation could change and that there could be changes in the balance in the Security Council. And finally, once this conflict one day ends, there will be opportunities for investigation and prosecution in Syria. And what is incredibly important is that all of this evidence, testimonies, video evidence, photographs, these disappear over time. People forget what they saw and what they heard. So it's incredibly important that this evidence is collected as quickly as possible and preserved so that one day, in whatever venue we will see, they can be used for a proper investigation and prosecution.
Rodney, Ole was laying out there maybe different avenues to get to justice. And I was reading about something called personal jurisdiction, which basically investigates crimes based on the countries where the victims are from, if that country is a member of the ICC. How realistic is that as an avenue, or what other avenues do you see?
Well, if the investigations show that perpetrators are from countries that have signed up, that might be a way of getting it to the ICC, because it has jurisdiction over nationals of countries who have signed up if allegations are made against them, and it can be established against them. But I think if you're looking at focusing on the country itself, Syria, and those who have been involved, all of the parties who've been involved, then another mechanism is going to have to be found. The General Assembly, in taking this step, it's an innovative one, has shown that there may be possibilities for courts being established outside of the Security Council. And the UN and international lawyers are going to have to think out of the box of getting ways of getting that in place. Of course, there's always the possibility of national prosecutions in Syria and elsewhere with the consent of countries. But if that's not forthcoming, then other mechanisms will have to be looked at. But I have to underscore that this would be something that focuses on all of the sides, all of the factions, and therefore should be supported by everyone to establish accountability in a impartial, independent way. That's the key here. It must be separated from the politics and the political issues. This is about lawyers and police officers going to work and showing on the evidence what has happened, and only where they can prove crimes can those be taken forward. But that's what the rule of law offers, and all parties on all sides should be supporting that, so that everyone knows what happened, and if there is sufficient evidence, those people are brought to account wherever they come from and whoever they might be.
Rodney, you do bring up a good point. What are the different challenges in holding a government responsible for war crimes as opposed to opposition fighters or ISIL or some group like that? What are the different challenges?
The investigations are going to focus on individuals. This is not about stigmatizing one side or the other. It's about looking at those people who are in charge and those on all sides who may have committed crimes and investigating them in their individual capacity. So states are not going to be put on trial. That can't happen. We're looking at individual criminal responsibility, as happened in the former Yugoslavia, where there were a number of different parties involved, and it wasn't about focusing only on the Serbs or Croatia or Bosnia, but looking at all of those on all sides and focusing on individual criminal responsibility. The key will be to get evidence that can be used in trial, and that's what's significant about this panel being formed, is it's been tasked to get cases ready. And that's very different to preparing general reports or looking at general allegations. You have to get the evidence now, and it's got to be based on evidence that's reliable, that's credible, that can be used in courts. And that's the way to proceed, because then it can't be criticized as being political. It'll be based on the facts.
Sharif, as we know, the UN has had a very difficult time getting monitors in, getting anybody in to do anything. Is there any chance that this vote will just make it that much more difficult for the UN to do their job?
Well, the regime from the outset has made it very difficult for the UN to do their job. So I don't think this in particular would make any difference in that respect. The regime has refused entry to investigators from the Commission of Inquiry, and I think, as the other guest mentioned, I mean, it's very telling that the regime and its allies would be so opposed to an inquiry that is going to look into abuses by all sides. This is not about stigmatizing the regime. It's about accountability everywhere. And I think, if the regime and its allies claim to have clean hands, as it does, then why is it so opposed? I think because it knows it has the most to answer for. I mean, if you look, the former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, the former UN Human Rights Chief Navi Pillay, the former head of the Commission of Inquiry, Paulo Pinheiro, they've all said that the regime is responsible for the majority of civilian deaths and injuries. So it knows it has the most to answer for, and that is why it's opposed to any investigation. Are
you concerned about this becoming one of those arguments where it's a false equivalence or the both sides issue when both sides maybe aren't necessarily equal? What's the danger in that?
Well, both sides are not equal, and I think it's very diversionary to claim that they are equal. The regime is responsible for the vast majority of civilian deaths and injuries, and that has been very well documented. So any attempt to divert attention from that is, I think, very disingenuous.
As we mentioned, the UN Commission of Inquiry on Syria has been collecting evidence of war crimes for 5 years now. It says it's interviewed hundreds of victims and witnesses and has concluded that the Syrian government is committing crimes against humanity by indiscriminately bombing civilian areas and likely using chemical weapons. The commission says Syrian civilians have been arbitrarily arrested and detained by both the government and opposition, that ISIL is committing genocide against the Yazidis, and cultural heritage sites are being deliberately destroyed and damaged. Ole, how does one go about documenting war crimes?
Well, I think it is an incredibly difficult task, and it takes a lot of resources. It's painstaking work, because what you want to do in a situation like this, you don't want to just investigate and prosecute, collect information about the perpetrators who committed the actual crimes, as it were. You know, maybe the person who pulled the trigger, or the person who conducted the torture. Just as important is to look higher up in the ranks and to see who knew about this, who gave orders to this, who approved this, or who should have known about this, and to try to gather enough evidence to prove their responsibility. And that's the really difficult part. And that is why, you know, the Syrian Commission of Inquiry has done a great job at highlighting, collecting information, and some of that information will surely be used in future trials. But collecting information, evidence that will hold up in court, is a completely different game. And that's why it is so important that this new panel or mechanism that will be established is allowed to really focus on that. They get the resources to do that. They will be independent, so that they don't, so they're not seen as being biased. Witness protection is another issue that will become incredibly important for this body. But it is necessary, and it is an important first step.
Rodney, can you put into some context for us? This may seem like an obvious question, but I don't think it is. It's an obvious why prosecuting war crimes matters beyond the obvious. Why does it matter?
Well, I think in any conflict now, certainly since what happened in the former Yugoslavia, the international community is of one mind that there has to be some form of accountability for war crimes, violations of international law that are committed. We see that whenever a conflict emerges, there is automatically a focus on the need for investigations, accountability, victims' rights to be protected. That's the era we're in, and the ICC, although its reach doesn't extend anywhere, is part of solidifying that. It is so important because it ensures that there is a historic record. People need to know what happened. It's part of trying to heal grievances and reconciliations, a part of building peace in the future. But it's also about ensuring that there is deterrence for future war crimes. The more we do this, have these investigations and prosecutions, the less likely it is that we'll see conflicts on the same scale. It's of course not guaranteed, but it's something that we have to strive for because it contributes to preventing and ending conflicts in the future.
Sharif, you touched on this, and this needs to be delved into. Some of the flaws, as you see it, in the structure of the UN, specifically in the Security Council. What's your analysis, your assessment of what needs to change?
Well, the Security Council, as it stands, with the veto power of the permanent members, is inherently undemocratic, and it's inherently unfair. It means that any one of 5 countries can veto the will of the rest of the international community. And this is highly destructive. I mean, if you look at, for example, Syria, Russia and China have vetoed UN Security Council resolutions that have criticized the regime. In terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, America has used this veto to shield Israel. So there are conflicts where the permanent members disagree, you have absolutely no action taken. And I think this is inherently unfair. There must be reform of the Security Council, because where there is any conflict where there is a vested interest by any of the permanent members, and this is highly likely, then nothing will take place in the Council.
Do you think it affects the credibility of the UN?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there is as much anger internationally towards the inaction of the Security Council as there is to the perpetrators of war crimes in Syria. I mean, the world has watched as all this has taken place because the Security Council has been unable, and some of the members unwilling, to see justice done in Syria.
So, Ole, at this point, there is really no end in sight to what is happening in Syria. Yes, Aleppo has fallen, but that's certainly not the end. So I guess my question is, it seems that we're still a ways off from this conflict even being resolved, much less getting to any type of justice or accountability.
I think you're right, but I think also that justice and accountability can take place at the same time. You can have war crimes investigations, crimes against humanity investigations, and even prosecutions even before the conflict ends. And that, I think, is what's so important about this resolution and the establishment of this mechanism. Not only that, we hope that it will deter abuses and atrocities in a future conflict, but really we hope that this resolution will also have a chilling effect on the perpetrators, potential of future perpetrators of atrocities in Syria as well, that, you know, with the existence of this mechanism, they know that there is at least a chance that they might have to answer for what they're doing, and maybe that will make them stop and think and perhaps not commit atrocities that they would otherwise have done.
Rodney, the Security Council has in the past requested that the ICC investigate Darfur, Libya. Nothing has come of any of that at all. Are you at all optimistic that this will be different, that this needs to be different?
Yes, I think the General Assembly taking this step is flexing its muscles. For the first time, it's looking not just at saying we want this investigated, but we actually want cases prepared for prosecution. That language was specifically chosen, and it's sending a very strong signal to the Security Council about what its intentions are. And it is the democratic body that represents the entire international community. So that taking place is most important. We never thought when the ICTY was established as an ad hoc court that was going to come about. It was something that surprised many people, but when it happened, it was then worked on, and it has ushered in so much since then. Other international courts, the ICC. So we must hold on to that with this as well. This is an important breakthrough, and the General Assembly has to follow it through now with, and I must underline this, with the assistance of all of the parties. It's crucial that everyone who's directly involved participate in this and support this. This is not about a political solution. That's going to have to be done separately. This is about accountability, and it should be something that no matter which side you're on, you support.
Sharif, are you optimistic? And I think Ole made a really good point that it doesn't have to be an either or, that even while this horrible war is still going on, there can be another track of some sort of accountability. Are you remotely optimistic that this will be different? Is the will there for this to be different this time?
I want to be optimistic, but my overall pessimism about Syria is, since World War II, how many times have we heard never again? We have had tribunals about previous conflicts where, again, the point was never again. And yet here we are looking at things happening in Syria that we were saying should never happen again. So this is my concern, is that even when we have accountability reached in other conflicts, there is still going to be this inherent resistance by the parties to these abuses to resist accountability and justice as much as it can. So what we're seeing in Syria is what we've been saying should never happen again. And it doesn't fill me with confidence that, let's say, when the conflict ends, and let's say there is accountability over Syria, I don't think this will be the last of it. There will be other conflicts where we're going to see this all over again.
And thank you, gentlemen, for the conversation. I appreciate it. I'm sure we'll be calling on all of you again. Rodney Dixon, Ole Silving, and Sharif Nashashibi. And thank you all for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That is facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Rochelle, and the entire team, bye for now.